Matthew Stults with me. I found you from the Columbia website. So
Right.
to be honest, I said to myself, because I would like to have some people who are conducting research, maybe teaching in a college, and a little well versed in some of these topics. So I said, oh, let me look through Columbia. It's close to home. Maybe I'll get to link up with someone. Found your name, reached out to a couple people. You got back to me. It's awesome to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. Before we do anything, any introductions, I start with one of these cards here. So it's an icebreaker card. So just so you know, there's 3 questions on it, and you get to pick which one you want to answer. So you don't have to answer all 3. So you could pick anyone out.
Okay, I'll pick.
And then let's see what you got. Yep.
All right. Well, the 3 questions are, would you enjoy working from home? Well, I do, so yes. 2, is there any talent that seems to be passed down in your family? There's talent, but it seems to have bypassed me. And then thirdly, if you could have 1 million of anything except money, what would you choose? 1 million of anything. I choose laughs.
1 million laughs.
1 million laughs. I hope my life has 1 million laughs. Actually, that's a lot. So,
Yeah.
1.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Sure.
So, brief introduction. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. Again, my name is Matthew Stults-Kolehmainen, and I have a bachelor's degree from Hanover College in Hanover, Indiana. I have a dual major in physical education and psychology, and then I went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where I majored in human movement sciences with concentrations in exercise physiology, exercise psychology, and biomechanics. And then I did a Fulbright fellowship in Finland in exercise gerontology. And I was studying older adults and physical activity and mental health. And then I went back to Madison, Wisconsin for a while, and then Austin, and I started my doctorate in kinesiology and health education from the University of Texas at Austin. And then I was on tenure track faculty at Northern Illinois University in the Department of Kinesiology and Physical Education. I know this is a lot.
No, it's good for everyone to know.
I was there 2.5 years, and then I did a postdoctoral study, round of postdoctoral studies at Yale Medical School. It was a little bit like an integrated health program. It was actually called the Yale Stress Center in the Department of Psychiatry. And then I started another postdoc at Columbia University in New York. And that's how I became linked up with Columbia. And that was in the Applied Physiology program. I still work for them. I work for them full time. I taught exercise physiology laboratories. Now I teach exercise psychology. I also teach something like a metabolism class at Columbia. And now I work full time in exercise physiology at Yale New Haven Hospital as well.
So your expertise, a lot of your research, if I'm not mistaken, is in movement motivation, right?
Currently, yes.
Currently. Because I was reading through some of your, I don't know if they're kind of up to date, I would say, some of your newer studies in that. There was a lot of points about moving from cognitive motivation to affective motivation.
Right.
And so to me that sounds like, when I hear cognitive, I think of like kind of willing yourself to move, and I'll let you explain it or dive into that more. And then the affective would be a little bit more like feeling intrinsically motivated to want to move, or feeling, I guess, the more the feeling side of it. But maybe if you can tell me the difference, and the listeners, some might know what that means, some might not. So we have some people who are phys ed professionals, but we have some people who are just did personal training with me and sometimes tune in.
Well, for many decades now, a lot of exercise psychology and trying to understand human motivation for physical activity and exercise has taken a cognitive approach. In other words, they thought about motivation from a reflective standpoint. Okay, so like reflecting on or thinking about, what makes you want to move, or why you want to move, the motives behind why you're moving, goals in particular. So it's like been more of a goal-based perspective, or a social cognitive perspective on motivation for physical activity and exercise. So trying to understand a person's like a sense of internal confidence or self-efficacy and how that's driving their behavior, or how they relate to other people, perceptions of other people, what they do, how that impacts their motivation. So it's been typically from like this cognitive reflective approach, but now there's a trend in exercise psychology to move towards this affective or more emotion-based approach. And one of the key theories in this perspective is like a theory of hedonism, okay, which is essentially like trying to understand human behavior as it relates to the desire for pleasure, right? Okay, and so generally the idea is that things that you like, that are pleasurable to you, are things that you want. Okay, and so a lot of people ostensibly do not like exercise.
Right.
Is that because they don't have enjoyment? Is that because they don't have any sense of pleasure or feeling of pleasure? Okay, so if that's the case, how can we improve pleasure during movement? And if following that, if we can make movement more pleasurable, if we can help people to experience more pleasure during exercise, then maybe they will want it more. That'll improve their motivation or their intrinsic motivation to move. So this has been more of the sort of like the pendulum is swinging from like the cognitive approaches to the affective or emotion, hedonic motivation types of approaches. Of course, it is kind of like a pendulum. It swings one way and then it swings.
Right. Yeah, a little bit of both, okay. I'm sure.
Because like in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, it was this way. And then it switched over to a cognitive, and now it's sort of the pendulum is swinging back. And so certainly both perspectives are true. You know, people are motivated by goals. People are motivated to move when they feel like they're able to move. In other words, they have confidence in their ability to exercise, right? So those are all valid. The problem that we've discovered is that these like cognitive or reflective approaches, they don't actually predict exercise very well. Okay? There's not a lot of predictive power there. Cognitive approaches for like physical activity interventions. So let's say in your schools, if you want to create this like perfect, you know, cognitive or reflective based physical activity intervention to get your kids moving more. Well, the chances of that intervention working is smallish. It'll help. People will become more active, but it doesn't have the impact that we would hope it would have. Okay, so you know, sitting down with a client or a student and talking to them about their goals for physical activity, which is a reflective thing, right? It's a cognitive thing, will have an influence on their activity behaviors. But we also need to think about these other perspectives, like this affective perspective. Okay, so in other words, you know, what can I do to help you to make your exercise more enjoyable, more pleasurable? Okay, and one aspect of that might be just asking a person, okay, what do you prefer?
Right.
Because people's preferences tend to be reflective of things that they enjoy, right? Things that give them pleasure. So now there's this whole literature out there about like preferences for exercise activities, preferences for physical activities. You know? And so that's currently the direction I'm going, and that's how I study motivation, is from more of this affective, enjoyment, pleasure-based approach. And then, but specifically what I'm interested in is what makes people want to move or exercise or be active like right now. Okay, so their state of motivation, their motivational state. And so that's the area of research that I've developed, me personally, and that's what I'm publishing in. And that's my plan for my publications here in the future.
And I almost think about that as like there could be micro and macro reasons as to, right? So like in an individual moment, there could be things that impact me. If I just bump my knee, now I'm like, I'm angry, I don't want to move, whatever it is. And then there could be more bigger picture things like, I did the martial arts my whole life and I feel this obligation to, uphold the family. Like, there's, I think, and it sounds to me like you're focusing a little bit more in this moment, here and now.
Yeah, I want to use your example there of bumping your knee. So if like a hammer, for instance, in a doctor's office hits your knee, you get this jerk reaction. That's a reflex. There's no motivation required.
Right.
There's nothing in the brain almost at all has to. It's an automatic reflex. Okay, so but it's moving. So we can think of like the basic reflexes. We can think of basic instincts. You know, like a mother sees its child in danger. Well, it's like a maternal instinct to save your child.
Right.
There's really not much more. There's no motivation needed there. Right.
Right.
There's also what we would consider like basic drives for movement and locomotion and physical activity. So infants, from the time they're born, they have a basic drive to move. Right? There's a basic drive to move. Then as they get older, there's a basic drive for exploration. The terrible twos, right? They're constantly exploring, right? And then there's the drive for locomotion. In other words, from going to point A to point B to point C to do this. And so I want to go back to your idea there of like the macro versus the micro. We can even think about motivation for movement like at all of these various levels, right? To the much more cerebral,
right?
Which, okay, Sir Edmund Hillary was the first to climb Mount Everest. Okay, well that probably required a lot of higher order cognitive functioning to that motivation, right? And so when I think of the macro motivation versus the micro motivation, I tend to think of like these levels of motivation. But I also tend to think of like sort of like a basic hierarchy of motivations as well. So for instance, like the motivation to move or be physically active is kind of like at the top. And then there might be the motivation for locomotion, getting to point A to B, from point A to point B. The motivation to exercise, to go to the gym. The motivation to play sport. And then we have motivations of I want to look good, right? So the motivation to look good, the motivation to be healthy, the motivation to be attractive and find a mate, a motivation to get a trophy, whatever. You know, so we can think of all sorts of different motivational hierarchies or macro and micro levels. And certainly all of these things at various moments sort of funnel down into like maybe like a primary motivation, right? So there might be like a primary thing that's a primary motive that's driving you to move or not move, be sedentary, sitting at that moment. So for instance, right now, Anthony, you look very attentive. You look like you're thinking really hard and you're conducting this interview.
Right.
And so I'm just anticipating, okay? I just met you, but I'm thinking, okay, Anthony is like this very active person. I can see this tension in him. He wants to move. He's a very kinetic person, but yet he has this obligation to sit there and be still and think about what Matt is talking about, and so he wants to sit at the same time and be attentive. So you have this conflicting motives that also happen. Okay, I want to move. We're talking about movement. It'd be nice to move, but I want to sit because I want to conduct this interview. Okay, so I also think of it from that duality as well, like this tension between motivation to move and motivation to rest. And so there are various psychologists out there who think of like this is like one motivational system. You know, the motivation to move and the tension, the motivation to rest and be sedentary.
Yeah, and they're going to constantly flow back and forth.
Right. Yeah, and so you know, there could even be something like a switch, like a light switch. You know, like okay, you go from the motivation to move to motivation to sit. And like, what is responsible for that switch? You know, some people think it's just like fatigue. You reach a certain point where you're just so tired that you don't want to move anymore. You want to be still. You want to like now right now I have this tension inside me. We're talking about movement. Whenever I talk about movement, I want to move more.
So feel free to move as much as you want.
So that's why I'm more kinetic and like I gesture. Your cameras probably aren't looking at my feet, but my feet are tapping.
Right.
My heels are tapping. It's my way of like getting energy out and moving.
Right.
While sitting at the same time. So, you know, this is something that we learn through maturation, right? So children, you're probably much more like the switch. You know, they're either moving, they move, and then they like, right. But as adults, we sort of learn how interesting ways to sort of like combine these things,
right,
to accomplish both things at the same time.
Yeah, it also makes me think too, the difference probably between, you know, a healthy individual probably has this normal fluctuation of the desire to move and not move, kind of like eating. I'm hungry one moment, I eat, then all of a sudden I'm not hungry. It gets homeostatic. You know, but I think there's a slight difference. Wow, I lost my train of thought there. How was I just going on?
Yeah, that's okay. So you're talking, you know, I just picking up on the word you just said, homeostatic or homeostasis. There could be some.
Finish yours,
okay.
But I'm just going to write this word so it doesn't lose my mind.
Okay. There could be some biological regulation there as well, like, you know, some rhythmicity or some like what we call like a diurnal effect, you know. So which is something that I just published in, by the way. You know, it seems like for an average human, their desire to move peaks about 3:15 in the afternoon.
So time matters.
Yeah, so time does matter.
We're going to get to some of those environmental factors and daylight but before we jump into that, I was thinking about the idea of trauma, right? So like there's a normal, healthy individual who has this natural rhythmic pattern of move, not move, whereas someone, I think most people in our life, like if you live in a big city like New York City, have almost like movement trauma. Like they don't get to experience normal movement, or they don't get to experience it in a normal fashion that they would have. And now once you have this negative association with movement, now that habit is built and carries over into adulthood. And I'm curious your opinion on that. Do you think that that also plays a big role in people's desire to move as they age?
Well, I mean, certainly there's an aspect of just habit, right? You know, and so if you grew up in New York City like yourself and you're accustomed to certain area and a certain structure of your environment, then certainly just through force of habit, you probably have certain movement patterns. Mine are probably a little bit different because I live in New Haven, Connecticut, which is, for the audience, that's where we're at right now. We're actually we're in a state park where, you know, so here in the state park
we just hiked up,
which we just hiked
Practice
up
what
about,
we preach.
I think maybe 400 feet at least that we of elevation, something like that. You could double check later, but you know, so here I feel much more liberated to move and explore. Okay, so there's this idea out there of, we're talking about these tension systems of, you know, dualities of rest, sedentary versus movement. Well, also there's this sort of tension or duality between, you know, exploring, the desire to explore, versus the other side of that is exploitation. What does that mean? Okay, so essentially it's like moving about and just being at liberty to move versus, you know, doing something and getting something done, laboring. Okay, and I actually come up on this hike basically at least twice a month, but sometimes when I hike up here, I do it very much from like what we call an exploitation perspective. It's kind of a weird word, but also it's, in other words, it's like, I'm going for a hike. My goal is to go for a hike. I'm going.
Oriented.
It's like, yeah, it's even like, okay, I'm trying to burn a certain number of calories and get a certain number of steps, and, which I am trying to do. There are other weeks where I sort of might say I try to break that tendency. I'm also just a type A personality.
Right.
And I say, okay, I'm just going to explore. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to walk slowly, and I'm going to turn my head to the right, and I'm going to turn it to the left. And if I'm doing movement for the sake of movement, you know, and I want to discover things. And so I think, you know, it's particularly easy for us as East Coasters in general, in the United States.
A lot of
we're very focused.
And
that takes some, unfortunately, what that does is it takes some of the joy and the interest out of our activity. We've sort of like bifurcated or torn apart the idea of movement for the sake of movement and the pleasure of movement, and we've just made it like this labor-oriented type of movement. And so, you know, probably the affective, emotional benefits then of the movement are completely different in that perspective too.
I had an old post on my Instagram that said, I already work at work, right? So meaning like, I see a lot of fitness pages. You know, it's always like put in more work, very rigid side of things. And I think everything, you use the word duality, everything is that balance of work and flexibility and a combination of the two. But so I understand the work side of movement, but I also think that the world needs a bit more of the play side of movement. So when I wrote like I already work at work, I was kind of saying like I feel like my workout can be more playful. It doesn't have to be you know.
There's one way you can do that I employ, fortunately about once a month, but that is when you step into the gym, you just say, I'm not doing my normal gym workout. I'm just going to walk in and whatever impulse comes up, I'm going to do that. And so I
You gave that a name? Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, no, do I have a name for that?
Impulse workout?
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's my play workout, you know, it's just like, so I walk in and I just say, whatever interests me. I glance across, whatever interests me, I'm going to latch onto that. I'm just going to do it just because I'm interested in that. Usually what it is some person doing some movement, some exercise that maybe I haven't done in a long time or I've never done before. And then I wait for them to leave and go to another machine and then they do that. So maybe it's like, you know, it's tricep push down.
Right, push down, yeah.
But today's normally a leg day.
Right.
But with my leg day, it's like work, right? But today's a fun day in the gym or a play day. So I'm just doing whatever interests me. And then I'm done with that. And then I sort of look around and I'm like, okay, what interests me now? Oh, someone's doing a leg extension. Okay, well, I was going to kind of do that, but it looks interesting to me. But I don't put barriers or I don't put limits on myself on that day. I just do whatever interests me. And I find if I do something like that about once a month, it like really rejuvenates my motivation. Because it turns the gym instead of this place where I just work and I labor and this exploitation of the gym. Again, exploitation's a weird word, but it's actually a scientifically used word. It's from I'll find the name of the reference for you.
Sure.
Inslicht is his name. Michael Inslicht uses this word, exploitation versus exploration. But in any case, so I turn it into exploration. Or one time, actually here right on this trail, what I decided to do was I was just going to, weirdly, I'm just going to follow the fence around. For those of you who can't see, there's like this fence. And I just did it sort of like weird. I'm like, okay, I'm going to walk along the fence.
Right.
Like, why would you do that?
Right.
So I did that, and I go over here, and I found on the ground, right over here, on the other side of this pavilion, this little piece of paper that was folded up, lying next to the fence.
It was a love note from
It was. It wasn't a love note, but it was some little child, probably a girl, had used crayons to create this beautiful drawing, and obviously had lost it.
Right.
But she had drawn a picture of like herself and an adult woman, maybe her mother, and this pavilion. They were in like, or maybe it looked like this pavilion, and there was a sun and everything, and it was full. It was like, if I had not been walking along the stone fence here, I would have never noticed that. Because what I do is I typically do this very labor-driven hike, where it's like I go from point A to point B. It's actually from point A to point A. It's a loop, and I'm just very focused. You know, I keep my eyes focused, and I'm going along. But on that day, you know, it was like this little reward, in other words, because I found this like very beautiful drawing, and it's still in my refrigerator. So I went home and I taped it up to my refrigerator, and if I'm ever feeling down or something, I look at this like little drawing, and there's something just very child. Of course, it was produced by a child, and it's very childlike. And it's like something you'd see on Nickelodeon or something like that.
They didn't even know they drew it for you.
Right. And there's even a date on it, which is really funny. So it was November of 2022. In any case, so I've kept that. But I would have never found that little piece of joy had I been like in my sort of focused labor type of phase.
Yeah, I always see it on hikes too. One time we went, hiking with a group of like CrossFit people, half for like CrossFit, half for CrossFit was like competing to get to the top. Then you have some other people who are like looking around at the bushes. You could just see the two differences of exactly what you're saying. It's like, no, we gotta get there fast, and there's some exploring a bit more. But so I guess what you're saying is, do you think that people can benefit from incorporating more play or exploration
Yeah,
into their movement.
absolutely. Something just popped in my head, and that was like this old fable of the tortoise and the hare. This race, and it's a funny story when you think back on it, because the objective was, it's a race, right, between the slow tortoise and the hare. Who ended up winning? Well, it was the tortoise. The tortoise did it by sort of just slowly trudging along. And so it's sort of like the moral of the story is that the tortoise won because it was slow and steady and it just kept going. But I sometimes wonder, did the hare really win? Because didn't the hare sort of, it did fun things, it was off on this tangent, and it was off on this tangent, and it was doing this and this and this, and it lost the race. And we all herald now the tortoise is the winner, but the hare kind of won too.
Yeah, they win in their own way.
Sense. It's like how do you define success, in other words, right? And so if it's the winner of the race, then the unexpected winner was the tortoise, but in some ways, who enjoyed it the most, it was probably the hare. Yeah,
that's a very good point. And back to your piece before about duality, I do understand the value of both. I feel like a lot of fitness today is a little more rigid and could probably benefit from some of those playful exploration things, and maybe finding some of that inner child, or whether you did it when you were young or not, even as an adult, you could still explore tons of forms of movement. So I had this idea, and I'm curious your opinion on it, of more like a movement menu.
Yeah.
Like as a phys ed teacher, I used to say most of us are a jack of all trades and a master of one. So usually we, so it's a pun on that word, but we usually get into it because we had our background, like my martial art background. I was really good at that one thing. But then we still have to be a master of all, because we teach all these different activity categories. We teach games, we teach dance, we teach outdoor pursuits, we teach all these different things to our kids, and we could go through a variety of different units. And I almost think that personal training in some degree could evolve in some type of way to incorporating something more of like a movement menu, or some type of exploration of movement of what's a good fit for you.
Yeah, I love the idea. Well, what is a menu? It's something you open up, right?
Right.
And what are the sections of a menu? It has like the appetizers and the entrees and the dessert basically, right? So there's different sections, and then within each section you have choices. So the whole idea of a movement menu, I think, how I'm interpreting it is, you have choices, but those choices are categorized, right? So in other words, could you have warm-up choices, right? Can you have like the main body of the entree, like the main part of your workout choices, and then could you have your cool-down choices, right? And then when you're at a restaurant, it's kind of funny because they give you the menu and then they give you like 2 minutes to make a choice, right?
Right.
It's so hard, and I hate that moment because I'm scanning as fast as I can, and my goal is it's reflect a goal. I have this goal of I want the perfect thing to eat because I want the most pleasure, right? So it's actually a combination of I want a lot of pleasure from what I'm eating, but that's also a goal too. So it's kind of like this marriage between this cognitive perspective and this affective, emotion-based perspective. But I love that idea that people can get overwhelmed with choices. There's a reason we have menus. If you went into a restaurant and the waiter came up to you and just said, "What do you want?"
Right.
Well, I want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I don't know. It's the first thing on top of my head. Right? No. So, but also, it's really funny when you go to some of these diners, like the Greek diners and stuff. They give you so many choices. It's like, wow.
You're overwhelmed.
Like you're overwhelmed with choices. I went to this restaurant in Las Vegas recently called Picasso at the Bellagio Hotel, and it's a small menu, and essentially there's only 2 choices. You get the 7-course A or 7-course B.
Right.
And you just know you're at this Michelin rated restaurant, so everything is going to be excellent, but you only have 2 choices. And I really enjoyed the fact that in this case, I only had 2 choices, but I knew they were all very good.
Right. Right.
So it took the frustration of having to scan the entire menu. But in any case, it's like, in other words, but can we have like a happy medium there where, you know, it's not the Greek restaurant where you have so many choices that you're overwhelmed, which is most people's experience in a gym. Like
Right.
for a person who doesn't know a gym, you know, a lot of my patients say they're overwhelmed. They don't know how to use the machines. They want to be active, but it's so intimidating for them. You know, and menus can be intimidating. But you know, maybe we could make it a little less intimidating. I think that's some of the commercial gym chains right now. That's what they're trying to do. You know, maybe another idea is when you walk into a gym, you get like this little machine or something, and it even asks you, like, okay, do you want a pre-designed workout? Here's 2 good ones. Do you have a goal today? Do you want to do just something that's fun? We'll randomly create a random list of exercises that is fun and safe for your fitness level.
Yeah.
So I think there's like all sorts of great ways that you can incorporate this idea of like a movement menu. But the basic idea that also, okay, there should be like a warm up, there should be a main body, there should be a cool down, and it should be appetizing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's still structure to it. So you touched on something interesting there about the choice within more of a fitness style workout. And I was almost also thinking, so imagine, I think about it like this, that you have your workout in the gym, right? So that's a great way to build strength. But I always think that sometimes that might be good if it was tied to some type of activity as well. So meaning, you know, not that you have to identify as something, but let's say, for example, are you a climber? Are you a runner? Are you a dancer? Are you a martial artist? Are you a, you know, so finding some type of identity in movement. And then I think now when you go to a weight room setting, it becomes more like strength and conditioning. Like I'm getting fit for my activity. And there's a different motivation there to lift. Because now when I get thrown in judo, all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, being strong is going to be pretty useful. When I can't do a spin and dance, and I realize, oh wow, that's going to help increase my power, you know, rotational power, med ball throws. When you're now tying it to some type of activity that you're connected to. And I thought about the idea of creating a test. Not, you know, like there's going to be no perfect test, but like a test to learn more about yourself and what activity you might fall best in line with. Like, you know, would you want to be like, would you be well fit for martial arts? I mean, you could be fit for anything, but what's your personality gravitating, you know, pulling you towards? Are you an adventurer? Then maybe you'd be good picking something in outdoor pursuits. You know, are you a little bit more competitive? Then maybe you're better picking a game. Are you more exploratory? Maybe that could be outdoor pursuit, but it could also be dance. Do you like to express yourself with your body? So kind of like getting people to understand more about themselves, and maybe doing that through some form of a test, and then connecting them with an identity to movement that now when I go to a weight room setting, it is, you know, I have a different drive for wanting to be there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So there's a want to, right? I want to do martial arts. I want to do dancing. I want to do this. For your audience, we're like right on top of a big cliff here, right? The base of this cliff is Whaley Avenue in New Haven, Westville, and there's this dance studio down there called Alyssa's House of Salsa. And I drive past this place all the time, and I see people dancing, and I think, I want to do that. I want to dance. But I can't dance.
Well, you'd be surprised. You just got to start from the bottom.
Right, yeah, so I have to start from the bottom. So I think there's this like really interesting, you know, sometimes things that we want to do, but then we feel like we can't do them, or we're not able to do them. And so it's you know, I think that's another thing that's, in other words, what that causes is frustration. Okay, you want to do things that you want but you can't have. That creates frustration of your desire, and then you just sort of push it away, and it's just like, I can't do it, so right. And then, so how can we help people who want to do certain things to feel like they can do things, right? You know, how can we set them up with like mastery experiences,
Yeah.
these that start progressively, that build and start progressively. So if I had the courage to go to Alyssa's House of Salsa,
right.
you know, but then I'm also thinking, gosh, do I need a dance partner? Do I need, like, you know, who can I go with, you know, have go with me? And so, yeah, but in any case, I have these barriers in my mind that even though I want to do something, I feel like I can't do something. So, you know, in New York City, where you live, in Brooklyn, there's probably a very unique set of barriers there, structural barriers. You know, someone wants to go for a hike. Well, there's not a lot of great hiking in Brooklyn or Queens, right? You know, so how can we help them to do a day trip on Metro North or something so that they can get to Westchester or something, right? Or maybe there are even ways to even like simulate these experiences, right? So in the city, like VR headsets or something like that. So maybe, you know, maybe connecting people with the right equipment or the right places and the right times, and so like there's a lot of really interesting ideas that could be generated from this. But I agree with your core idea there that people have a lot of different interests, and it would be great if we could connect people with resources that match their interests, because many times people see something like on TV, they want to do it, but they feel like they can't.
Right.
There's not the resources to do it. So, but we're in this new technological era where barriers are falling very fast. So
it almost makes me think of how do you make it more inviting? Like you said you go to a martial arts school and everybody there has been. It's like there's one new beginner guy, and it can be intimidating. Salsa, everybody's spinning around. You know, they've been doing it for 2 years. Now you're the one new guy there. That's, you know, do you have like a, you know, introductory that like the first of every month is just for all new beginners, like, and we get people in, you know, that way. But yeah, like bridging that gap of that intimidation process in the beginning. How do we make it more welcoming for individuals who want to try it, and then where there could be proper progressive overload there, that you're not jumping into the top of the mountain, you're kind of going on your way up.
Another key issue is if someone's doing something that, you know, they are interested in, how can we keep them interested?
Right.
So, you know, humans tend to what we call like satiate very quickly to things, you know. So something that looks interesting to you at one moment, if you do it for 10 minutes, it won't be interesting. 10 minutes. Yeah. So like you have the Jenga tower, you know, Jenga blocks, and it might be interesting to like build them up, but how many times can you do that before you get bored with it, right? You know, and so I think that applies to like physical activity and exercise activities as well. You know, you're a martial artist, so what you've probably discovered ways to make it very interesting, because you have years of experience in this, and you know how to assemble these experiences in ways that always keep it enjoyable and interesting. Whereas some people just, you know, it's like, what do I just kick,
right?
I kick,
how many
or
times
I kick, you know, and then they satiate, you know, or they're learning how to box or something, punch, 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 you know, and then it's like, okay, I did that. Done. Right. So how can we also create then activities that keep people interested? You know, give them variety, because humans crave variation. They crave variety, and they bore very, very quickly.
In phys ed, there's a term for it, disguising repetition. So it's like you're still doing the same thing, but you're doing it in a different way where it still keeps you engaged and excited. So I guess as trainers or as coaches, thinking, how can you constantly stimulate that environment where you're not doing the same thing all the time?
So a great example of that is when I was in physical education in Indiana, which is like the Hoosier state. They play basketball, right? We're the Hoosiers, okay. And we do free throws over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I do it about 5 or 6 times and I'm done. Right. But yet we have a whole hour to practice free throws. And so, of course, now there's lots of games, right? Course or whatever, to make that more fun. But I remember the drudgery.
Yeah.
The drudgery of the repetitions. Now, drudgery sometimes is necessary in the context of sport.
Yeah.
Right. You know, they say like, if you could do 10,000 hours of practice of something, you are an expert in something with 10,000 hours of practice. And but most humans are not able to do something for 10,000 hours to become
Right.
an expert in it.
Yeah.
Right. So there's an interesting set of issues.
Yeah, and I think we often look to athletes a lot of times for this advice, and I actually think it's not the best place to look,
Right.
because you're talking about, you know, the 1 percentile of like when you're talking about general population, it's not, right? So for whatever reason that individual maybe, you know, maybe they were born with something, some type of genetic gift that someone else wasn't, and someone could say, well, no, I work very hard, but maybe even the work ethic or whatever your environment was able to create you to be in that position, that you're able to win and you feel the confidence that you can and can keep going. But for the majority of us, that's not it.
Yeah.
So I think looking to athletes and that piece of, you know, pushing through certain workouts and fighting to be the best in something. And I don't know if everyone has to have that same kind of goal, and people don't have to necessarily push through miserable workouts to be the best. You know, if an athlete's doing that, and oftentimes a lot of those athletes are hovering the line of injury anyway. They're hovering the line of being the best and being potentially injured. The baseball pitcher's blowing out their shoulder, or pulling a hamstring, or, you know, the sprinter's pulling a hamstring, or whatever it is. They're one step away from that, and I think general population is different, and I don't know if we have to always look in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, we see celebrity athletes on television, and we admire them and what they've accomplished and the money they make, and the girlfriends and partners they have, and so on and so forth. But yeah, these people go through like many long hours of monotony.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
and then we think, okay, well, okay, they can do this, they can withstand this. Maybe that's what I should do too. But you know, there's something different about the motivation of like professional athletes in particular. How they can endure like hours of monotony. Like think about like Michael Phelps and just being lonely in a pool for thousands of hours. I don't know how you could endure that. You know, that's why I'm not a swimmer.
And it's not healthy socially too, right? There's like other health factors there too that
Right.
are not good for you.
I mean, for those of us who are just trying to be physically healthy and trying to have, you know, enjoy our lives, then the motivational perspectives are like very different. You know, so we do not have to subject ourselves to hours of monotony in the gym. You know, it's funny to see those pictures on the internet. People with like headbands and they're
Right.
like, oh, I'm doing my bicep curls. It's drudgery. It's
Right.
boredom. It's terrible. Like, you know, no, it doesn't have to be like that.
Right.
I particularly like the like Nintendo, like the Ring Fit and stuff like that. You know, a lot of them are like really fun. Problems with these programs is it's a little bit difficult to individualize it or personalize it so that it's truly enjoyable for the person and also safe at the same time. So sometimes I worry about programs like that. We're currently doing some research in that area, but it's really striking this balance of habit versus spontaneity.
Right.
Right? And how do we accomplish that? How can we both have good physical activity habits and exercise habits, but how can we have spontaneity at the same time?
Yeah.
So that we're not bored with what we're doing.
And that's a fine balance. That's the whole push and pull, right? Because if you want to be fit in something, you have to also do it regularly,
Right.
which then takes away from the spontaneity.
That's one reason
know?
why, like, if some people choose to just have physically active jobs,
Right.
right? Because then it's actually both, you know.
Right.
So, for instance, if you're a UPS deliverer, actually these guys are on strike potentially, like right now. But in any case, that's a whole different question. But you know, so they have these very physically active jobs, but yet there's a lot of rancor and spontaneity with what they're doing as well, like delivering packages, and so. They really essentially don't even have to think about being active because it's what they do.
Right.
Now, but for a lot of us in modern times, we have desk jobs, and so we have to really struggle with getting physical activity in, both having good physical activity habits, and then it forces us to have to think about our activity, but then when we have to do that, it takes away a lot of the joy of the activity.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I've had a lot of fun recently with the fitness wearables.
Yeah.
You know, and so usually about once a year I buy a new one.
Right.
And I do the programs and stuff that are in it, and you know, it buzzes me and it tells me, okay, get up and move during the workday.
Right.
I try to get about at least 1,800 steps in a day before I go to work. I always do a 20-minute walk during my lunch break at work.
Right.
I allow myself enough spontaneity. When I want to go to the bathroom, I go to the bathroom. When I go get a drink of water, I get a drink of water. If I want to go to get a cup of coffee, I get a cup of coffee.
Right.
So there's both the structured physical activity time and there's semi-unstructured as well.
Yeah.
So that I'm also not feeling like, because one thing that like humans also don't like is being overly controlled.
Yeah.
There's nothing that like it's a killjoy for your motivation. Like when you're forced to do something. And so as an exercise physiologist in a clinical setting, I try to avoid imposing exercise guidelines on people. I do to some extent with my clinical populations that I work with. But I know that when I tell someone, okay, you have to do 45 minutes of cardio 4 times a week, which is actually kind of like how our program's set up, some people will comply with that and adhere with that.
Right.
10% of my patients, maybe 15%, will be like, okay, I'll comply with that, I'll do that. But a lot of people will not do that.
And some, I'm sure, say they will and then just don't.
Yeah, in fact, some people particularly will not do it because they were told to do it, right? They're a little rebellious that way.
I understand that.
And I was like that as a teenager, okay?
Yeah.
If a coach told me you have to do this, actually I was like, I overcame that just because I had goals.
Yeah.
You know, I had performance goals, and so if a coach said, okay, you need to do this mileage, I was generally agreeable with that. But there was also this sort of like rebellious part of me that did not want to do anything that I was told to do.
I understand it too. I have some of that in me.
And so that's sort of like the difference between like intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Okay, so like when someone tells you you have to do something, okay, you might comply with it, but you might rebel against it. There's also something called introjected regulation, whereas you take the have to and you sort of internalize it. You sort of make it your own. So, okay, I have to do 10,000 steps. But you can sort of like re-own that and reclaim that. Like, okay, well, I'm doing 10,000 steps because I want to do 10,000 steps.
Right. So
Not because I'm reframing it. As a matter of fact, the way I get around this is, my goal actually is 12,500 steps.
Right.
It's actually a little bit more, but because I don't want to do 10,000 steps because someone told me to do 10,000 steps.
Right.
I'm going to do steps because I know steps are good for me, right? But I'm going to choose my own step level. And so, in other words, it's giving a person a level of autonomy, because we know just from like a self-determination perspective, when people feel more autonomous, right, they feel they're more motivated to move, right, when they have choices. When people feel related to people, they also feel more motivated to move. So, for instance, when we were walking up here today, it was actually really cool, because often I do it alone, but I had you and your girlfriend with you, and so I was like, okay, you know, we have this like what you call like a superordinate goal. Like, okay, the 3 of us are climbing up to the top of this mountain because we're going to do this interview. We have this goal. We're doing it together, and then I'm even not thinking about the movement because we're doing it together, and we've got, you know,
exactly. It's a whole different
disguising
repetition. It's a whole nother way of doing the same thing you've always done.
Absolutely. And then there's a third factor, and that is competence. So if you feel, you know, which is highly related to self-efficacy, like your feeling of like your perceived behavioral control, your ability to, well, actually that's a little bit more like autonomy, but in other words, competence, like I'm able to do this, and I'm demonstrating my competence in climbing up. Right? I do not feel competent in rock climbing.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say the salsa.
Salsa too, but you had this idea of like rock climbing. Okay, so for those in your audience, there's this big cliff face about 10 feet from us that drops down.
Right.
Okay, I do not have any competence for going down that or for going up. Actually, I did that. I was in the Marine Corps, and so yeah, we did that in the military. Actually, that's really funny. I did that because I was told I have to do that.
It, right.
And then you sort of, that's actually also amazing because in those situations, I had the ability to turn off my brain.
Mm.
I can't, the motivation there is really hard to explain.
Mm.
Where you sort of like detached from all of the fears and everything, and you just do it.
Mm.
It's like just do it type of thing.
Yeah, right.
But you know, competence, no. Currently, I do not have any sense of ability, and I do not feel competent at all about rock climbing.
Mm.
Now, if I know you're somewhat interested in rock climbing,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
and you probably feel a little bit more competent and able, maybe we could let's say like you're trying to make me or help me to rock climb.
Right.
How could we do that?
Right.
Well, first you'd have to convince me that rock climbing is fun and good,
Right.
right? And I'm not going to kill myself.
Right.
And it's safe. Okay, let's say we could get beyond that. Okay, well, let's say we do that together. Okay, well, there's the relatedness. Okay, so that improves motivation. You're going to help me to feel competent over a 6-week course. Okay, so I'm going to start as a beginner, but after 6 weeks, I'm going to be a proficient rock climber, right? And I have choices, so there is some autonomy. So you give me choices, like, okay, we could go up this easier cliff face, or we could go up this moderate one, or you know, there's this harder one over here, but I have choices and I have options. You know, so there. This is what we call self-determined perspective, or self-determined theory of motivation. So that would be like motivation from more of the macro perspective that you were just talking about. I study more motivation from like the no.
Right. Right.
What do you want to do right now?
Right. So, go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
So no. So I was just gonna say like, okay, I'm gonna pose that question back to myself and to you. Like, am I? Let me just ask you, like, how motivated are you right now to move on a 0 to 10 scale? Where 0 is not motivated to move at all, and 10 is the most you've ever wanted to move.
I'm probably somewhere in the middle, or
Somewhere.
5
At 5.
or so.
What do you think you were an hour ago when we were climbing up?
I was maybe more like a 6 when you told me that you know, this is a pretty cool location, and I was thinking about the view we might see and the stuff that we might see along the way.
Okay.
So probably a little bit higher.
Just thinking about from the time you woke up, were you ever higher than a 6?
I would not say so. No.
So the highest desire you had to move today was a 6?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. What about yesterday?
Ooh, yesterday. I can't even remember what I did yesterday.
That's fine. Well, okay, so
yesterday. What was it? Oh, yeah. Well, yesterday I was very physically active. I was helping teach a class at the karate school, and then we do an event afterwards. But then when I went back to the house, I was kind of getting in the zone, and when I was done, I said I need to get up and walk after we were, you know, sitting down writing the questions and getting the pictures together, posting on Instagram, a lot of tedious things.
okay, so that's really interesting. So your desire to move was really high after an extended period of sitting, in other words.
For sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. I could feel that.
Okay.
Very in tune.
We call it just deprivation. So a deprivation of movement caused you to have this building tension of wanting to move. Okay, which gives evidence that the desire to move is really something like a basic drive. So we can think of the motivation or the desire to move like. By the way, I just saw this beautiful butterfly back. It's actually back here.
Oh, wow.
And
Oh, I see it.
You can see it. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's this gorgeous, huge yellow butterfly
Yeah,
in the woods
yeah.
here. So I actually got like this little burst of wanting to move just from seeing that.
Right. Wow. Okay.
What is that?
Yeah.
So I went from like, a 5 to an 8 instantly. Just like, is that me wanting to capture the butterfly? Is that me wanting to be like a butterfly? Is that me wanting to, is it just general movement? You know, so that actually kind of proves my point here that there are a lot of influences on your desire to move. nature, seeing other things move, being deprived of movement. Actually, I'm feeling the deprivation of movement right now.
Mm-hmm.
These benches are also really rigid and hard.
Yeah, they don't let you like shift in.
Maybe my butt's too bony or something. I don't think I have a bony butt, but in any case,
doesn't give us much flexibility.
I do sort of feel like this building tension, and I also am anticipating because we're going to a cave, Judge's Cave,
Mm-hmm.
which is like this historical place. And so I'm kind of like antsy right now.
Yeah.
So anti-fidgety to go show you guys this before we end up here. So I'm anticipating that the interview is about to end, and so I'm also getting this building tension. And so our desire to move is like it really undulates, and based on a whole variety of factors, environmental factors, anticipating the future, what we just did, the fatigue of the activity that we just did coming up here, and so you have to like. We really need better theories to account for all of these sort of impinging factors that influence your desire, your state motivation to be active, to move, to exercise, or to be still sedentary and do nothing.
Which it again hits that point to me in my head of the idea of being in a natural setting.
Right.
I think most people are not in a natural setting, whatever that means. But when you're in a cubicle, a lot of these things that would naturally motivate us to move. Oh, the butterfly's not going to be there. Oh, nature's not there. Oh, my friend said something, whatever. So I feel like the fact that we have these very abnormal environments that we've created for ourselves almost bashes us down to a point where now and then you have so much incompetence with movement and so much lack of confidence with movement that then it just piles on top of each other. And it might almost be, I almost see it as like a disease, right? I mean, obviously we say obesity is a disease, but it almost seems like it's a malfunction of natural human behavior.
Well, it's a pathological obesogenic environment.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing we've done in the exam rooms in our hospital is we have these huge TV screens in our brand new clinics. And so what I do with my patients is to help motivate them to move, because an exam room is kind of this sterile, intimidating environment. Yeah. But we can really motivate people to move because we put on walking tours on YouTube. So I go to YouTube and I just ask I give them choices. I'm like, where would you like to do a walking tour today? Oh, Rome, Athens. Just go to YouTube, walking tour, Athens. Type it in, and there's these dozens of walking tours, and we put it on the screen, and you can follow people walking. So it's like, okay, we're watching people walk on the screen, and my patients and I, we're marching in place. So we're marching in place, and we're doing it somewhat in like a natural environment because we have these big screens where other people are walking. So we have, and they're really nice screens. So it's like we have.
You can see well.
Yeah, you can see it pretty. It's very clear. Some of my favorites are London, like around London Tower or London Bridge, excuse me, or the Tower of London. And so there's right on the Thames River. So there's these videos of people walking, and we're walking like we're walking with them. We're marching in place. And then I put on this really peppy music, and I don't know. Let me just grab something real quick. This is actually one of the playlists I play in the clinic. So it's just it's an Italian DJ, and it's called Go Tomorrow, and it's this little playlist here. So we have this playlist going on.
I'm already tapping my foot.
And you're already tapping your foot. And we're marching in place. And we've got a walking tour with the Tower of London on the Thames River. And we have two screens. So we have a screen here. They can look. We're a screen here, and we're moving. And it's people who would never move. They can go 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes because they're with me. We're doing it together. And hundreds of other people on these screens. We've got this peppy music, with no lyrics. It's just peppy, upbeat music, about 138 to 140 beats per minute, something like that. And it's amazing. And then we get implements. So, you know, we get like little Swiss ball. We'll do like the Jane Fonda movements.
Sure.
You know, all sorts of fun stuff that even people with very low mobility and function, they can enjoy and appreciate. It's not intimidating. And this is sort of like the motivational techniques that I use in a clinical setting. And I find it works.
So it almost sounds like the more you can simulate a natural environment, or even just a more dynamic environment, the more beneficial that would be towards motivation and movement.
So let me ask you, as I'm turning on this music here from this Italian DJ,
Yeah.
the name of the song is Go Tomorrow. You get it? I'm not selling you songs, but this is on iTunes. So what kind of, your motivation state? We said 0 to 10. You're a 5. Now, what is your motivation state now at this moment?
It might be more up back towards 6, 7-ish, 6.5, 7.
It has like a little, give you a little bump instantly.
Definitely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I would feel that even more than the average. I'm sure some people, obviously there's fluctuations, but music will instantly get me going. Which brings me to the question too. So now that you put on music, it's making me think of it. And actually, are you finished with your thought there before I switch gears?
Go right ahead. By the way, if you want me to turn off the music, I can turn off the music.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. If you're feeling it, you can leave it.
I just don't want to interrupt the audio, but so I can leave so I'm going to leave like a little track in the background for us, just as a proof of principle here. But go ahead with your question.
The within a moment, are there things, for example, music, or are there any things right here and now, daylight, the time of day I work out, the music I put on, if I'm with a person, are there any things that people can incorporate right here, right now to help? If I was sitting in my cubicle, I could say, oh, I could change this thing, and that might,
Yeah, it's almost like a formula. It's like if you, okay, I'm gonna slide over more peppy music.
Right.
Too many people, less people.
Right.
Increase the light. Yeah. So when daylight has a profound impact on your motivation to move. Okay, that's just proven. Music, seeing other people move.
Stop dancing. You got magic right there.
So these are just proven things, and it's just so weird that we don't take advantage and exploit these like things that obviously help people to want to move more. Things that things that kill people's motivation to move, pain.
Yeah.
So, your knee hurts is a huge killjoy. Maybe dodgeball for some people.
Right. Right.
They don't. Right, that excites other people, right? But for some people, it kills their motivation, maybe. Just a basic understanding of factors that help make people want to move more. But there's also this thing of avoidance, right? So there's approach motivation, things that make you want to approach moving, and then there's avoiding, right? So thinking about the approach versus avoidance motivation, people with severe fear of moving, that's called kinesiophobia. Like maybe they're bone on bone on their knees, and so again, they may want to move, but they may even have like a clinical fear of moving. Or people who feel like their heart's gonna explode or something. That's very rare, fortunately. But so just from a clinical perspective, or even as a physical education teacher, just understanding what are basic things that help people to want to move more? Like, can we change the light bulbs?
Right.
Because the fluorescent lights are so bad.
Right.
Right, we've learned in the hospital they changed out the light bulbs. They put in these new light bulbs that not only help you to see better, but literally they sort of stimulate your desire to move.
And I'm sure just going outdoors.
Yeah.
Kids out,
Yeah.
I noticed as soon as kids, it immediately made me say, one of those formula things might be more open space.
Open space.
That as soon as kids see open space, this like genetic desire to just locomotion, it almost seems like, from my observation, it's something I've learned. They see it, it's like recess, and they're just running out for it.
Yeah. Well, why is solitary confinement so punishing? In prison, they actually, I think by law in most states, I think they have to be given an hour of free time outside, even in solitary confinement. But that's because if people will go insane, right? No daylight, small spaces, they're all alone. People will do crazy things in those situations. So some people have argued that it's a universal human right to be able to go outside and move. Just think of it from that perspective, right? Is it a universal human right to give people opportunities to go outside and move? I think perhaps it is. I think that's a whole different perspective about movement. And what that says about the human need and desire to move. I actually just published a paper recently. If you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to take a look. It's humans have a basic fundamental need, physical and psychological need to move the body. I'll send this paper to you. And that explains the innate, inherent drive for humans to move. Now, there's a maturation, aging component to this. Kids, again, they want to move, right? And it's sort of lost in adolescence. But it's also partially lost in the classroom, where we're like, you have to sit, we condition. In other words, we reinforce sitting. We condition children to just sit and pay attention, right? Whereas they might naturally want to move. So there's an aging aspect to this, there's a maturation aspect to this, there's certainly a hormonal aspect to this, but there's also reinforcement and conditioning perspective to this.
Which makes me think, obviously rethinking, I think, our classrooms and schools is, to match that need.
Active lessons, so it's just proven. My mentor at the University of Texas has published here, John Bartholomew, on how active learning helps kids to better master spelling and math. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and what's his name again?
John Bartholomew.
So maybe people could look up some of his strategies.
Yeah, active lessons. The problem there is it's getting teachers and principals to believe it. It's right, because again, small spaces. You have a bunch of kids crammed into a small space. The teacher wants them to sit and be still, and in other words, the teacher wants to minimize chaos. Right. So again, how can you have this balance of movement but also learning at the same time? Right.
And organized.
And organization.
To find balance.
It takes a lot of, teachers have to be really well trained.
And especially when you're overpopulated and have lack of space in a place like New York City especially. So the challenge is definitely there. But like you said, there's ways, there's steps that people can take. To train.
I think, just redesigning classrooms so they're more on stools instead of traditional chairs.
Right.
And if you can get kids to at least just, again, march in place is the default exercise.
Right.
Okay? And again, I think it's kind of like this universal human right that if a child needs to move, they need to move.
Yeah.
Why, if they, again, it could just be march in place.
Is it similar to not feeding, almost
loss of recess and playtime is some respect. Could you say it's cruel? Depriving a child of food would be cruel, or depriving a child of water would be cruel. I don't know if we would say it's cruel, but it's it might feel cruel to the child. Honestly, it might.
Right.
In other words, it could feel very displeasurable to a child. I have to sit like this. I felt that way.
Yeah.
I also noticed as a kid that when at recess, when I was outside very active and just running, I got that energy out, and then I was able to focus and concentrate better in the classroom.
Oh yeah. They did a whole presentation on the power of play.
Right.
So I might argue, you hear growing up as a kid, don't play, or move around too much, or stop horsing around and do your homework, whatever it is. But I think culturally we have not fully really understood the value of play, and just for being productive, the value of play, and just what it teaches us socially, how it impacts our brain, how it makes us more creative, so being able to sit still.
Why do animals play?
Right.
Like why do two little rams, why do they butt heads it's like they do it because it basically prepares them for adulthood. For competition, like growth and maturation and formation of bone, like literally depends on movement and play, right? And it also helps children to learn how to interact with other humans, right?
Yeah.
And how to cooperation. So it's like good social skills as well. It's not just physical development, but it's also social development, it's emotional development.
And the big one I really learned more about as time went on was how the brain is wired.
Yeah.
So exploring whether it's through movement, through play, through any form of play, whether you're technically, if you go to a library and pick out your favorite kind of book, even that's a form of play, where you're kind of like not doing the exploration piece. All exploration wires the brain in a way that is healthy too, and helps to maintain neurons in the brain that are necessary for memory, learning, mood. So
it's why
YouTube
is so popular, because when you go onto YouTube, you're essentially exploring. You don't even know what comes up on your little feed, right? And so it's one reason why it's so addictive, is because it's endless exploration, right? But after a long day at work, like I've had in the clinic, I'll go home and then I'll spend at least 20 minutes, probably 30 or 40 minutes on YouTube, because it somehow satisfies my need to explore. Plus, I wake up really early and I do my gym workout before work, so that's already done.
Imagine if we could do physical YouTube, where you walk over to the channel here and walk over to the channel there.
Well, maybe that's why cardio sections have like all the television screens and stuff like that. And equipment is set up so you could put your phones like right there, and you can watch YouTube while you're exercising. When we end our interview here, which I think we're going to do in a few minutes, you're going to have some additional exploration, because you're going to see things that you've never seen before.
Yep.
And you're probably anticipating that.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen it many times, so but it's still fun for me because, you never know what you're going to see.
Right.
In nature, right?
Right.
Wildlife, butterflies, insects, whatever. So, life is a little bit like a kaleidoscope, right? It's like you take this, what a kaleidoscope, you turn it, and you see these varying colors and combinations, and the whole point of a kaleidoscope is it's got these little rocks in it, or jewels, or whatever it is, and you turn it and it comes up with these endless combinations, right? And you keep turning it and turning it and turning it, and then more combinations, right? I guess that's why they invented kaleidoscopes, right?
You're right.
Right. Actually, it's a really interesting point also, is to work a kaleidoscope, you have to move it.
Yeah.
And because, right, and so it's like you're getting rewarded for your movement. The reward is you see this. Now, it's kind of an old toy, right? Like who has a kaleidoscope anymore?
Right.
But maybe another iteration or idea surrounding this is when I wash dishes. I pour in the dish soap, and then I'm moving my hand like this because it generates more bubbles.
Right.
And I'm just so motivated to do that because, even at my age as a grown man, it's like, I still like bubbles. But the key there is how it's different from a kaleidoscope. When you're making the bubbles, you're also at the same time being productive, because I'm making soap to wash dishes. So it's kind of like, that's like a secret combination of I'm having fun, I'm being productive at the same time. So it's like, how can you be fun and productive at the same time? And if you can sort of like combine these principles together, then people will move and move and move until they're tired of moving.
It always makes me think, I use movement to compare to many areas of life, but it just makes me think of life in and of itself. Right? We have DNA is made up of what, like four simple letters?
Yeah.
And they're constantly rearranged to
Amino
now.
acids, right?
Yep. And it's a combination of being productive, right? There's definitely survival from that, but it's also a form of play that we've created all these cool things around us too. And this constant rearrangement and movement of just these four simple letters, But yeah, we went longer than I expected. It's a good conversation when it just keeps going and I, have more and more questions and we're rolling with it. But as we start to wrap up here, I'm going to take a quick peek just to make sure there's no important ones that I missed. Is there anything on your end that you want to share, maybe? Not that you have to, but just opening the floor before we close out.
Yeah, I just think a basic of understanding of do you want to move right now? If you want to move, why do you want to move? Or why do you not want to move? Just understanding motivation in the here and now will really help a person understand their motivation on like a much grander scale. So thinking of motivation on a micro level is what I'm doing right now. I think people get lost in this whole big macro level, and they're trying to understand like, okay, what will help drive me to move more? Well, what would help to make you move right now, like literally right in this moment? So that's the perspective I'm taking. I think it's a useful perspective, and I hope it's beneficial for your audience as well.
Awesome. Yeah, this was great. A lot of gems in here. On YouTube, I'll get a bunch of nice little mini reels out of this. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your expertise. We'll definitely stay connected. I'll look to follow up on some of those things that you said, and some of the people you mentioned, and the other studies, and especially the active classrooms. Maybe try and get some of that for people. I think that's an important one. But I appreciate you, your time, your expertise, and I'm excited to hike a little more with you. I'm glad we're practicing what we preach here. The music got me pumping.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, my pleasure. Let's do it.
Awesome.